Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
So, I want you to just imagine a standard venture capitalist boardroom for a second.
Right, the typical scene.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the usual pitch deck up on the screen, some scalability charts projecting out over the next 5 years.
All the standard discussions about user acquisition costs and margins.
Right, but instead of pitching like a revolutionary software platform or some new AI model, the founders in this room are pitching the mass production of human bodies.
Which is just wild to even conceptualize.
It really is. And the key technological selling point of this pitch, the minds have been intentionally left out.
I mean, it completely shatters the standard parameters of what we'd ever consider a viable business venture.
Definitely. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are actually bypassing the usual pleasantries today because this document really demands immediate attention.
It's a very brief intelligence report, but every single word does some incredibly heavy lifting.
For you, the listener, we've custom-tailored an analysis of a specific, highly secretive startup. They're known as R3 Bio.
And as we just teased, this intelligence report indicates they are actively pitching the creation of cloned, non-sentient human bodies.
Which sounds like science fiction, but this is a pitch happening right now.
Yeah.
And, the brevity of the intelligence here is kind of what makes it so dense, right?
Oh, absolutely. When you're looking at interceptive briefings or these high-level situational reports, the analysts don't waste space on filler.
They just cut right to it.
Exactly. They distill a massive, complex situation down to its absolute core elements.
So let's look at the operational reality of this entity first. Because, to understand the product, you really have to understand the environment it's being born into.
Right. The context is everything here.
Yeah. So the report specifically tags R3 Bio as a covert startup. And anyone who follows the tech sector, you know the drill with stealth mode. Right?
Sure, you keep things quiet to protect your intellectual property before a big launch.
Right, but covert implies a completely different risk matrix. You don't use the word covert for a clever app algorithm.
No, not at all. Stealth mode is just about protecting your market share from competitors. Covert implies that you're actively dodging institutional oversight.
Like regulatory bodies.
Exactly. If you're operating a biological company under a covert label, the implication is that you are operating way outside the accepted bounds of international regulatory frameworks.
So it's not just a secret, it's hidden for survival.
Yeah, visibility in this case isn't just a competitive disadvantage. It is a literal existential threat to the operation itself.
Oh, okay, but let me challenge the mechanics of that for a second. Because if visibility is an existential threat, how do you actually execute a pitch?
That is the big question.
Right. The report clearly states they are pitching this development. And, a pitch inherently requires an audience.
It requires slide decks, financial projections.
A perceived market.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it requires exposing your core premise to outsiders. So how do you scale a covert operation through traditional investment channels without just totally blowing your cover?
Well, that friction between secrecy and capitalization is really what makes this intelligence so critical to look at. A pitch means a structured business model actually exists.
Not just a theory.
No, R3 Bio isn't just an abstract research paper. They are attempting to capitalize a corporate endeavor behind closed doors.
Meaning they need real money from real people.
Exactly. They are projecting a tangible return on investment for something entirely unprecedented, which means they have to be selectively bringing high net worth individuals or maybe, shadow funds into the fold.
Yeah, so they're curating their audience very, very carefully, which really makes you wonder about the due diligence process.
Oh, it would have to be intense.
Right, because if you're a VC sitting in that room, how do you verify the science without exposing the company to, international bioethics tribunals?
You can't.
Yeah, you can't exactly ask an independent university lab to just double-check their biological model.
No, the due diligence would have to be entirely internalized. And that suggests R3 Bio already possesses a profound level of proof.
Like a working prototype.
Yeah, a prototype or definitive biological data that is so compelling it secures funding without any traditional external validation. They essentially have to prove the impossible inside a locked room.
Man, that's wild. Well, let's dissect what they are actually trying to prove in that room. Because the language of the report is incredibly specific.
It really is.
It says R3 Bio has been identified as pitching the development of cloned, non-sentient human bodies.
And every single term in that phrase carries immense scientific and legal weight.
Let's break it down, starting with cloned.
So cloned establishes the foundational mechanism. We aren't talking about synthetic biology from scratch where you print a novel organism.
Right.
We're talking about human DNA being replicated. They're taking a biological blueprint that already exists and duplicating it.
Okay, and then human bodies establishes the physical reality of the product. They are pitching the construction of a tangible physical vessel.
Exactly. But the word non-sentient is really the absolute linchpin of the entire endeavor.
Yeah, that's the part that really messes with your head.
Because it's the single word that changes this from a medical curiosity into a massive ontological paradigm shift.
What does that mean exactly in this context?
Non-sentient means a body entirely lacking consciousness, no feeling, no self-awareness, no subjective experience whatsoever.
See, I want to push back on the biological feasibility of that pitch. Because, if you're listening to this, you might just be assuming non-sentient just means brain dead.
Which is the natural assumption.
Right. But if the body has a functioning central nervous system to keep the organs alive, the heart beating, the lungs breathing, the cellular metabolism functioning, isn't some baseline level of sensation totally unavoidable?
It's a valid question.
I mean, are they pitching a scientific impossibility to naive investors just to secure early-stage funding?
Well, the intelligence report explicitly mentions, quote, related technology and research alongside this pitch.
Okay, so they have some sort of mechanism.
Yes. While we don't have the actual blueprints, that notation suggests R3 Bio is presenting a specific engineered mechanism to these investors. Think of it kind of like a biological headless server.
Oh, interesting. Could you explain the headless server concept for anyone who might not be familiar with network architecture?
Sure. So in computing, a headless server is a machine that operates perfectly without a monitor, a keyboard, or any user interface.
It just runs in the background.
Exactly. It processes data, runs applications, and maintains its internal environment flawlessly. But there is absolutely no interface for a user to interact with it locally.
Oh, wow.
So R3 Bio appears to be pitching a headless human.
A headless human. That is a terrifying phrase.
It really paints a picture, right? The cellular metabolism functions, autonomic systems keep the vessel alive, but there is no subjective interface, no mind logging in.
So the engineering challenge isn't just growing the tissue. I mean, we already have regenerative medicine working on growing isolated organs like livers or, heart patches in a lab.
Right, that science is already progressing.
But the real product R3 Bio is pitching is the active engineering of the absence of the mind. They are creating a biological fail-safe to ensure the lights never turn on.
Exactly. And if we look at how that could theoretically be achieved, it would likely involve genetic knockouts or targeted suppression during the embryonic development phase.
Really? How does that work?
Well, you would essentially engineer the clone so that the higher order structures of the cerebral cortex,
Which is the area responsible for conscious thought, right?
right, the areas for thought, memory, subjective experience, those simply fail to develop. But at the same time, you'd leave the brainstem entirely intact to manage respiratory and cardiovascular functions.
Which opens up an entirely different logistical problem that I'd imagine investors would immediately ask about.
The maintenance.
Yeah, the maintenance. Because if you have a living adult human body without a brain directing physical movement, how do you prevent massive muscular atrophy?
You can't just leave it there.
Right. A body sitting motionless in a vat or a medical bed degrades rapidly. Do they hook the nervous system up to, like, a synthetic neural stimulator to force the muscles to exercise?
It's highly probable. The maintenance of an entirely passive human physiology would require an immense, highly specialized infrastructure.
It's not just a petri dish.
No, the related technology mentioned in the report likely covers not just the creation of the clone, but the total life cycle management of it.
So automated physical therapy,
Yeah.
synthetic nutrient delivery.
Electromuscular stimulation, exactly. It is a massive, ongoing logistical operation.
And the reason you go through all that trouble, the reason you engineer this incredibly complex headless server is the legal and operational loophole it creates.
Yes, that is the absolute core of their value proposition.
Unpack that for us.
Well, if they can definitively prove to a buyer that the mechanism for non-sentience is absolute, it completely alters the legal classification of the product.
Because it's not a person anymore.
Right. Under most current legal frameworks, a human body without the capacity for a mind ceases to be recognized as a person. It becomes a highly complex biological object.
A commodity.
Precisely, a commodity.
So they are stripping the humanity out of human biology so they can sell the flesh without triggering human rights violations.
This dark concept, but yes.
I mean, if you have human DNA, a beating heart, and functioning lungs, but no subjective experience, you are no longer a who, you are a what.
And, standard business vocabulary completely fails to capture the gravity of that transition. We usually talk about startups disrupting a marketplace.
Right, creating new verticals, leveraging synergies.
All the typical Silicon Valley jargon.
But the intelligence analysts who compiled this report, they abandoned that clinical language entirely.
They really did.
They gave this specific pitch a very distinct, ominous moniker. They categorized the R3 Bio situation as a Days of Noah startup clone scenario.
And when intelligence analysts reach for historical or mythological phrasing like that, it indicates that their standard bureaucratic dictionary just lacked the capacity to describe the threat level.
Because intelligence reporting is designed to be dry.
Right, extremely dry. You usually see terms like biosecurity hazard, or technological leap, or market asymmetry.
But Days of Noah is practically apocalyptic. I mean, it jumps right off the page.
It's a massive red flag.
In the literary and historical traditions it comes from, that phrase represents a period of foundational disruption, an era where the natural order was completely corrupted.
Where boundaries were crossed that were never meant to be crossed.
Exactly, leading to a profound worldwide reset.
It implies an ontological threat. And, an ontological threat doesn't just challenge our safety or our economy, it challenges the very nature of being.
It challenges how we define reality.
Right. By attaching the Days of Noah label to the R3 bioclone scenario, the intelligence community is signaling that this pitch challenges the fundamental definition of natural life.
So let's explore what that ontological threat actually looks like in practice. Because if R3 Bio successfully commodifies human biology, decoupled from human identity, it forces a rewrite of the entire legal structure of society.
Top to bottom.
If a body is just hardware, do you own it like you own a car? Can you patent a specific genetic expression of a non-sentient clone?
The patent law implications alone would paralyze the current judicial system.
I can only imagine.
Think about it. If a company holds a patent on the actual fail-safe mechanism that renders the clone non-sentient, they essentially hold a monopoly on the mass production of human biology.
Because nobody else can legally make an empty vessel.
Right. They control the rights to the blank slate.
And it really makes you rethink the baseline assumptions of medical science entirely. I mean, for centuries, medicine has been about preserving the mind-body connection.
Healing the vessel so the person can continue to experience life.
Exactly. But R3 Bio is pitching the exact opposite. They are perfecting the vessel, specifically to ensure no one is home to experience it.
It is the ultimate industrialization of biology.
Taking the bespoke, naturally occurring miracle of human life and just turning it into a scalable, repeatable manufacturing process.
It's unsettling. And, if you are listening to this right now on your commute or maybe while working at your desk, it is incredibly easy to just distance yourself from this.
Oh, for sure. It sounds like the plot of a distant dystopian movie.
Something that happens in a fictional universe.
They're like an abstraction, a thought experiment for a college bioethics class.
But the reason we are analyzing this report today is because this isn't a thought experiment.
No, this is a real pitch.
Happening in the real world, documented by intelligence agencies.
And it forces all of us to ask what it truly means to be human if our physical forms, like our very DNA, can be manufactured as empty commodities.
It's a profound question.
If the biology that makes you who you are can be replicated and stripped of its mind, it fundamentally challenges how society values you as an individual.
It completely shifts the definition of humanity from the biological to the purely conscious. And we have always assumed the two were inextricably linked.
We never had a reason to separate them.
Exactly. But if they are separated, our entire ethical infrastructure, which is built entirely on the assumption that a living human body contains a human person, just collapses.
We are entirely unprepared to have that philosophical debate on a commercial scale.
And that's the danger. The technology always outpaces the philosophy.
Every single time.
And in this case, the technology is actively seeking venture capital, while the philosophy hasn't even begun to address the basic premise.
Which leaves a massive regulatory vacuum for companies like R3 Bio to exploit. I mean, they operate in the shadows because they know that if they can establish the technology and build the market first, the legislation will just have to play catch up.
They want to create a reality that already exists before the lawmakers even know what's happening.
Which brings us to one final, deeply provocative thought for you to mull over. Something that builds directly on the mechanics of this source material.
This is the part that really keeps you up at night.
Yeah. We've spent this time unpacking the what, right? The cloned, non-sentient human bodies. And we've unpacked the who. This covert startup R3 Bio operating in the shadows.
But the most crucial variable in this entire intelligence report is the why.
Right. We talked about how pitching inherently means seeking capital based on market demand.
You don't build a complex, incredibly expensive biological manufacturing pipeline unless you have a buyer lined up.
Exactly. R3 Bio believes there is a massive return on investment for this unimaginably complex undertaking.
A venture capitalist doesn't fund a multi-billion-dollar covert biology project just to prove a scientific point.
No, they fund it because someone is willing to pay a massive premium for the end product.
So if a market successfully forms for cloned, non-sentient human bodies, what ultimate, unimaginable end-user application is driving that demand?
Who is buying an empty human vessel? And what exactly do they plan to do with it?
The intelligence report leaves that question entirely open, but the existence of the pitch confirms that the demand is real.
So what are the possibilities?
Well, whether it's for limitless, perfectly matched organ harvesting without the need for anti-rejection drugs, or, something far more complex regarding longevity and physical transference.
The buyers are out there.
They are definitely out there.
Man, it's really something to think about the next time you hear someone casually talk about the next big startup disrupting an industry.
It really puts the phrase disrupting an industry into a terrifying new perspective.
It does. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this intense deep dive into an intelligence report that honestly redefines the vanguard of biotechnology.
It is a dark corner of the technological frontier, without a doubt.
But understanding the mechanics of what is being pitched behind closed doors is really the first step in navigating whatever comes next.
The landscape of what is biologically possible is changing at an exponential rate, and maintaining a critical awareness of these covert shifts is our best tool for anticipating the future.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep questioning the boundaries of the technology you interact with, and always remember to look for the implications hidden beneath the pitch deck.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.